Hello. Hey, how are you doing? Are you having fun? Yes. Are you having fun? Okay, good. I'm happy because I'm having a lot of fun. It's great to be here again. I think it's the third time I'm here in Vue London, in Vue.js Live this time. And the title of my talk is You're Probably Using Lighthouse Wrong. And I know it sounds a little bit provoking. That was my intention, but I don't assume you're using it wrong. I really hope you do it, you're using it in the right way. But just in case you're using it wrong, here's my talk. So, my name is Filip Rakowski. I'm a Chief Developer Experience Officer and co-founder in Vue Storefront. I was introduced as a CTO because I used to be a CTO, but we hired a better CTO. So right now I can move to the things that I'm best at and that I enjoy, honestly, a little bit more. Yeah, I'm also a technology council member of Mach Alliance. Who here heard about Mach Alliance? Okay, so Mach Alliance is an alliance of the biggest enterprise vendors that are modernizing the e-commerce landscape, and I'm extremely proud to represent it. And who heard about Vue Storefront? Please raise your hand. Nice. It's getting better every year. So, I work in the e-commerce industry, and I work in the e-commerce industry literally all my life. And building e-commerce storefront is harder than it seems. Like, you feel powerful after displaying, the first product, the first data on your website from one API endpoint. But the road from there to production is very long, and it's often painful. And I can guarantee that you will feel physical pain once you learn what faceting is. So the goal of Vue Storefront is actually to provide tools that save you from this pain. And Vue Storefront is open source, so you can check it on GitHub and give a star if you like it. I'm not encouraging, but it would be nice. And in the e-commerce industry, performance is one of the most important things to look at, really. The fact that the way how people look at this is often completely wrong is another topic, but that's what I'm going to address in this talk. So Amazon did a study on that topic. And what they learned is that every 100 milliseconds in added page load costs 1% of revenue. For Amazon, it's millions of dollars, really, 100 milliseconds. And speaking about numbers, if you need a good source of arguments for your boss, for example, to take care of performance, because it's important, but you need an argument, check out this website, WPO Stats, which stands for Web Performance Optimization Stats. It will give you a great insight on how optimizing performance helps other companies to grow their revenue. And it feels quite crazy from today's perspective, but 5 years ago, when we were writing the first lines of code for Vue Storefront, the topic of front-end performance was almost non-existent in the web developer space. At that time, JavaScript frameworks were just gaining the traction. AngularJS, React, they were already well-established tools, gaining in popularity every day. Vue, it was just getting the attention of the broader developer community, fighting with frameworks like this ones. Do you know those frameworks? Raise your hands if you know all the frameworks, all the logos from this picture. Oh, really? It could have been Vue, but luckily Vue made it to the third place. So almost no one cared about how fast the website built with those frameworks are. And of course, now everyone say that putting so much JavaScript on the front end was a terrible idea. But honestly, it wasn't that clear at that time. It wasn't that clear because the reason why we are having performance issues with single-page applications these days is because of the ecosystem and how much JavaScript you're adding through the ecosystem, not the frameworks themselves. And as long as we're using PCs or laptops as our primary machines, which, believe me, like 7 years ago was a normal thing to consume the web, no one seemed to be concerned with the growing size of websites. Both CPU and internet bandwidth, they were growing faster, and websites were growing in their size. It all changed when mobile phones started to become the preferred way of consuming the web. And according to Google research in 2017, it took on average 15 seconds to fully load a web page on a mobile phone. Imagine 15 seconds. If I wouldn't have only 20 minutes, I would just wait to give you, this perception. At that time, the awareness about the impact of this poor mobile performance on the business started to emerge, but we're still lacking an easy way to actually link those two components, so performance and business metrics. And everything has changed when Google Lighthouse started to gain popularity. So I remember when it was first introduced in 2018, it became super popular, super rapidly adopted, the same way as progressive web apps. And at that time, everyone started to be obsessed about performance. Everyone started to be obsessed about progressive web apps. But you know what? They really didn't know much about those. It was all a marketing from Google. And unfortunately, not that much has changed since then. So what makes Lighthouse so widely adopted? I think it's simplicity. You run a test, you get a number between 100 and 1 that tells you how good or how bad the performance of your website is. Everyone, even those without any technical background, can understand that. And honestly, that's the root of the problem. Because the reality is not that simple. And web performance or user experience, it cannot be represented by just a single number on the screen. In addition, there's tons of nuances around Lighthouse. So how it works, where the numbers come from, etc., etc. And we will navigate through all these nuances. And at the end of this talk, I hope you will feel that you know how Lighthouse works, where these numbers come from, when to trust it, and when not to trust it. But let's start with a simple question. What does Google Lighthouse measure, really? Can anyone tell me? What Google Lighthouse measure? Okay, I have a feeling that a lot of people doesn't try to answer this question. So they assume that the number has to be high to be right, and when it is low, it is bad, and that's it. That's all they need to know. And as we can read on the Google Lighthouse website, the goal of Lighthouse is to measure page quality. So the audit divides quality into 4 different metrics: performance, accessibility, best practices, and SEO. All of those combined should give you a very good perspective on the quality of the website, and by that, try to accurately predict the user experience of this website. And try to predict is super important here, because no audit will give you any information and definitive answers if your user experience is good or bad. Guess what? Your users will. So Google has always promoted this performance score as the most important one. And I think in the heads of general audience and all of us, really, the Lighthouse score equals performance score. So quality page means page with, high performance score. And don't get me wrong here. Performance is definitely a major factor in influencing the user experience. But the truth is, it is so nuanced that even all 4 metrics of Google Lighthouse, they won't tell you if it is good or bad. In reality, there are just so many factors influencing good user experience that it's impossible to tell that just by using any tool. So, without knowing the context, it is very easy to make bad decisions that logically could seem correct. So let me give you an example. BMI. Who knows BMI? Do you know what this stands for? Body mass index. And I think body mass index is exactly like Google Lighthouse, and I will tell you why. So does 30 BMI mean that you're obese? If you look at the chart, you can say, yeah, with full confidence, right? But when you dig a little bit deeper into those details of how the results should be interpreted, we learn that this scale doesn't work for a very large amount of people. Older adults, women, muscular individuals, the interpretation for them is different. But the list doesn't end here. The interpretation for children and adolescents is also different. So actually the only group that comes to mind that actually fits into BMI are, I don't know, non-muscular, middle-aged males. That's it. So the initial results could lead you to decisions that are bad. And if you don't dig into those specific details, you will just make bad decisions. So this kind of thinking could lead us to real disasters. For example, here on the chart, we can see that we can quickly jump to the conclusion that we can put an end to really horrible things just by banning worldwide cheese consumption. So let me quickly explain how the Google Lighthouse score is calculated to make sure that we are all on the same page. The Lighthouse score is calculated from a bunch of other metrics. Each of them has their own weights. Some of them are more important, some of them are less important. And it's important to know that because when you want to optimize the score, you should start by optimizing the things that have the biggest weight, but not because it will give you the best results, but just because they are the most important ones. And the algorithm is changing with each version. So it's a very important thing to acknowledge, because if you are optimizing a website or if you're doing, I don't know, a migration or something like that, never compare the previous Lighthouse score with the new Lighthouse score. This is not the right thing to compare, because most likely the scoring algorithm has changed during that time. And the score could decrease, increase, mostly because the algorithm has changed, not because you have changed something. Okay, so we already know how this score is calculated. This is like 50% of truth. But what we don't know yet is where this number is exactly coming from. So we know how it is calculated, we don't know the environment. And the environment you run the test in is extremely, extremely important. So most people use Chrome DevTools to measure the performance, so to run the Lighthouse audits. And I will tell you this is the least reliable way of doing that. Okay, so raise your hand if you're doing this. So don't, please. Because there are multiple external factors that are actually influencing your score. One of them is your network. Another one is your CPU. Another one are extensions. Yes, if you have any extensions, they are also included into this Lighthouse audit. For example, if you have Grammarly, you can take a look. It is adding something at the very bottom of your page. So we can decrease the impact of those by running it incognito mode, by applying a proper throttling, etc. But this is still going to be different on different devices. So let's say we have 20 people in the company, everyone would run the Lighthouse score, the Lighthouse audit. The scores will be completely different. And you can have much more consistent results, but if you implement something like Lighthouse CI, it's Lighthouse CI that is running on every pull request. Or use PageSpeed Insights. What is PageSpeed Insights? Who heard? Good. Because that would be my recommendation. It's a website made by Google itself, and you can use it to perform very quick Lighthouse audits on any website remotely on one of the Google data centers. So PageSpeed Insights usually uses the data center that is the closest to your location. Sometimes you could use a different one, for example, if the one that you want to use is under heavy load. So you could have slightly different results between runs. In addition, please keep in mind that when you're having a website, on this website you probably consume multiple APIs. They could also have inconsistencies. So really nitpicking on the Lighthouse score is not the point, because it will always be different. There will always be some differences between runs, and those differences are coming from the dependencies, for example. And so even though the PageSpeed Insights score will be more consistent, it's still far from being a good representation of how your users are actually experiencing your website. Because this score is running on the emulated budget Motorola. So unless all of your users are using budget Motorola, then it's not a very good representation of how they are actually experiencing your website. The good news is PageSpeed Insights will also tell you how your website performs in the real world. So at the very top of every audit, you will see 3 metrics called Core Web Vitals that has to be green to positively impact your SEO results. Yes, you can get an SEO boost if you have green Core Web Vitals, and the boost is individual from each of the metrics. And the 3 other at the bottom are also quite important, especially interaction to next paint that will become a new Core Web Vital in March of the next year. And another problem with Lighthouse is that it is just an algorithm. So you just learn how it works, right? And if you know how something works, then we could treat it. It gets an input, it gives an output, right? You can easily find a lot of articles that are actually showing how you can build the least accessible website in the world with 100 Lighthouse score. But you can do even more. it's equally easy to trick the performance score. You can detect the Lighthouse user agent and serve a completely different version of your website for auditing tools. So the thing that I've seen, and I've seen it unfortunately more than once, is that what people are doing, they're removing the script tags from server-side rendered application and serving this to the Lighthouse audit. And because JavaScript is usually the main bottleneck, the main reason why we're having bad performance scores, then it's magically super high. But it has nothing to do with a real user experience. And if you think about this, it's just stupid, because Lighthouse became so important that we're cheating it for really no reason. Like, there's no benefit from that except from lying to your customer, for example. So after hearing my presentation, you can get the impression that, in my opinion, Lighthouse is completely useless. And this is definitely not my point. I think Lighthouse is a wonderful tool, really wonderful tool. And it contributed a lot to a better, faster web. But the problem is not in the tool itself. It's more in the way how we are using it or misusing it. Because the name Lighthouse has its purpose. Its goal is to guide you on improving page quality, not on giving you definitive answers if it is good or bad. And I've seen websites with great user experience and low Lighthouse score, and the opposite. Good performance is a trade-off. You have to always keep that in mind. So 100 is never a goal, because you always have to sacrifice something to make the performance better. Sometimes it's an analytics script, sometimes it's a feature, and it's not always a good business decision, really, to get rid of some of them. So remember, it's a trade-off. Don't treat performance as the ultimate goal, because you might end up with a website that is only displaying text without CSS, because that would be the perfect website for Lighthouse, right? And now, when it's worth using Lighthouse? So to me, Lighthouse shines the most when we want to quickly compare different versions of our website to see if there was an improvement or maybe decrease in its performance. So it's definitely worth implementing Lighthouse checks in your CI/CD pipelines using Lighthouse CI. And you should also audit websites with similar complexity or your competitors to get like a realistic perspective of what is a good score and what is a bad score. Because for a blog, everything below 100 is a disgrace. Really, it's a shame. But for the e-commerce website, 60, it's a good score. It's much more complex. It requires much more analytics. It's just something, it's just this type of a website where performance shouldn't be the highest priority. It should be extremely high because, as we learned, we are losing money. But at the same time, the user experience is not only performance. And Lighthouse is definitely not a good tool to measure the actual user experience, because it's a synthetic data. It has nothing to do with how your users are experiencing that. And to understand how your users are experiencing your website, well, try talking to your users. You could be surprised about how they are experiencing it. And you really don't have to set up any additional monitoring tools to check that. If you audit your page on PageSpeed Insights, at the very top, you will see how it is scoring against those 4 most important metrics, 3. So you could think, okay, where this data is actually coming from, right? This is an old picture of the previous results of PageSpeed Insights. Right now we have 3 at the top, but I think it's irrelevant. So where does data comes from? This data comes from the last 30 days, and it's collected on the devices using Chrome. It's very important to acknowledge, so it doesn't include other browsers. And if you're using Chrome, actually, you're automatically sending this data to Google. So this is how they know how the website is used. And the only requirement for actually collecting this data from any website is to make it crawlable. So if your website is crawlable, then you will see the real-world data. Nothing else you have to set up. And this data, if you go a little bit deeper, it comes from something that is called Chrome User Experience Report, CUX in short, which collects performance metrics from all of those devices using Google Chrome. And you can also get access to this, to the history of your metrics, in the CUX dashboard in Google Data Studio. It's all free. You can generate really nice reports that are showing how your performance was changing over time, how it is changing, depending on the device, etc., etc. Extremely useful. And again, the only thing that you need to do is make your website crawlable. Then the data is collected. Now, before I finish, I keep saying about this difference between so-called lab data, and that is measured in a specific environment, and the real-world data of your users. And it's important to not optimize the former. And here is why. If you do a PSI benchmark on a few websites, you could often see this picture. What is wrong in here? Who can tell me? Anyone? OK, so this is an e-commerce website. And we see that the synthetic score is 81. I said 60 is good for an e-commerce website, so 81 is amazing, right? But if you look how it translates to the real user experience, we'll see that it is terrible. Like our 3 core web vitals are not passed. And if we look at things like interaction to next paint, it's terrible. So this is just an example of what could happen if you only optimize for the Lighthouse score. It could be completely missed with how your users are experiencing your website. And that's all I had prepared for today. So I hope you learned something. If we have any e-commerce geeks in here, I'm running a newsletter about this, so you can check that. And if we have any web performance geeks, I'm posting a lot of tips on Twitter if you're interested. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for having me.